The moment my daughter laughed in my face and said, "That car is mine now," I knew I had already lost far more than a vehicle. 10 minutes later, flashing police lights filled the windows of the restaurant, and everyone at the table stopped eating. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to Family Betrayal if stories about real family betrayal mean something to you. And one more thing, the faces, photos, and scenes you see are only visual illustrations to help tell the story. They aren't the real people involved. I raised my daughter, Emily, by myself after my wife passed away when she was 12. Every overtime shift I worked was for her. I skipped vacations, wore old clothes, and drove the same black SUV for almost 15 years because every extra dollar went toward giving her a better future. When Emily graduated from college, I let her borrow my SUV while she looked for work. I told her it was temporary. She hugged me and promised she'd give it back as soon as she bought her own car. Months turned into almost 2 years. Every time I asked about it, there was another excuse. She was saving money. Her job wasn't paying enough. She needed it for interviews. I believed every word because she was my daughter. Then I found out she had accepted a promotion, making almost twice my salary. When I gently asked if I could finally have my SUV back, she didn't answer my calls. Instead, I got an invitation to a family dinner at her house. I thought maybe she wanted to surprise me with the keys. Instead, I walked into the biggest humiliation of my life. My SUV was sitting in her driveway with expensive custom wheels, tinted windows, and a personalized license plate. That wasn't what hurt. What hurt was seeing everyone acting like it had always belonged to her. I smiled anyway. I had no idea that before dessert, someone would call the police, and my own daughter would smile while it happened. I tried to ignore the knot in my stomach as everyone gathered around the dining table. Emily's husband was carving the roast, my sister was pouring drinks, and my grandson kept running back and forth through the house. Everyone looked happy except me. I finally cleared my throat and smiled at Emily. "Hey, since you're doing so well now, do you think I could take my SUV home tonight?" The room went silent. Emily looked at me, leaned back in her chair, and laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a real laugh. "Dad," she said, shaking her head, "you've got to stop calling it your SUV. It belongs to me now." A few people chuckled with her. I thought she was joking. "I only loaned it to you," I replied calmly. "The title is still in my name." She rolled her eyes. "I've been driving it for 2 years. I paid for the tires, the paint protection, and the upgrades. It's basically mine." My heart dropped. "I never gave it to you." She shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. "Well, that's how everyone sees it." I looked around the table, hoping someone would speak up. Instead, my brother-in-law muttered, "She's using it more than you ever did." It felt like I was the outsider in my own family. Have you ever had people you loved make you feel like your kindness was a weakness? I stood up and calmly held out my hand. "Emily, give me the keys." She crossed her arms. "No." One simple word. After everything I'd sacrificed for her, she couldn't even pretend to respect me. I pulled out my phone and quietly said, "I'm giving you one last chance." She smiled again. "Go ahead. Call whoever you want." I nodded. "I will." I walked outside before anyone could stop me. My hands were shaking as I called the non-emergency police line and explained that the vehicle parked outside belonged to me, was titled and registered in my name, and the person using it was refusing to return it. The dispatcher asked me to stay where I was until officers arrived. 5 minutes later, red and blue lights reflected across the neighborhood. The laughter inside the house disappeared. As the front door opened and everyone stepped outside, Emily still looked confident. She had no idea the officer's very first question was about to change everything. The first officer walked up to me and asked, "Sir, is this the vehicle you're reporting?" I nodded and handed him my driver's license, registration, and the title I had kept in the glove compartment file at home. I had brought it with me because something deep inside told me this night wasn't going to end peacefully. Emily stepped forward before the officer could say another word. "Dad is just upset," she said with a forced smile. "I've had this SUV forever." The officer stayed calm. "I understand, ma'am. But whose name is on the title?" She hesitated. "Well, his." "But," he gently interrupted her, "that matters." For the first time all evening, the confidence disappeared from her face. She started explaining how she had paid for new tires, insurance, detailing, and upgrades. She insisted that because she'd invested so much money into it, the SUV should be considered hers. The officer shook his head. Paying for improvements doesn't transfer ownership. The silence that followed was unbearable. My sister finally spoke up. Can't you two just work this out as a family? I wanted to. More than anything, I wanted my daughter to simply look at me and say, I'm sorry, Dad. Instead, Emily folded her arms tighter. I'm not giving him the keys. The second officer looked at her and said quietly, Ma'am, if the legal owner is asking for his vehicle back, refusing could create a much bigger problem than this dinner. Her husband slowly reached into his pocket. I hadn't even realized he was holding the spare key. He looked at Emily, then at me. His voice barely came out. Emily, maybe we should let this go. She stared at him as if he had betrayed her too. Without another word, he walked over and placed the keys in my hand. They felt heavier than I remembered. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt empty. As I turned toward the SUV, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The back seat was filled with children's toys, family photos, and grocery bags. My granddaughter's favorite blanket was folded neatly in the corner. This wasn't just my vehicle anymore. It had become part of their everyday life. I suddenly realized getting my SUV back was only the beginning. Driving away would cost me something far more valuable. And before I even opened the driver's door, Emily said something that broke my heart more than her laughter ever had. I froze with my hand on the driver's door. Emily looked at me with tears in her eyes, but there was no apology in her voice. If you drive away in that SUV, she said, don't expect to be part of our lives anymore. The words hit harder than anything that had happened that night. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I looked at my grandson standing on the porch, confused, holding his stuffed dinosaur. He had no idea the adults around him were tearing a family apart. I closed the driver's door without getting in. I walked back to Emily and held the keys in my hand. I never came here to win a fight, I said quietly. I came here because I wanted my daughter to remember that borrowing something doesn't make it yours, and kindness isn't permission to take advantage of someone. Nobody spoke. Then something unexpected happened. Emily's husband finally broke the silence. He warned us months ago, he admitted. I kept telling you we should give it back. Emily's shoulders dropped. The anger on her face slowly gave way to guilt. She looked at me for a long time before whispering, I thought, after all this time, you'd just let me keep it. I shook my head. If you had asked, maybe we could have talked about it. But you stopped treating me like your father and started treating me like an obstacle. She burst into tears. For the first time that night, she hugged me, not to manipulate me, but because she finally understood the pain she had caused. A month later, she bought her own vehicle. My old SUV came home with me. We spent months rebuilding our relationship, one honest conversation at a time. Trust didn't return overnight, but respect slowly did. Now, every time I start that old engine, I don't think about the police lights or the argument. I remember the lesson that changed both of us. Love should never require you to surrender your self-respect. Helping family is a gift, but healthy boundaries protect both the giver and the receiver. If you were sitting in my seat that night, what would you have done? I truly want to hear your answer, so share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched you, share it with someone who believes family should be built on respect, not entitlement. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Family Betrayal for more emotional stories that remind us even the deepest wounds can teach life's most valuable lessons. Sometimes the hardest thing to reclaim isn't a car, it's your own voice.